Hello, this is Neo, just an average CSGO player, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
FaZe Clan have announced that they have let Adren go. His trial period with the team has ended, and they have signed former Virtus.pro player and in-game leader Neo, also on trial at the moment, and he will crucially not just take Adren's place in FaZe Clan, he will actually take over Nico's current role as the in-game leader, and Nico will go back to just being a fragger, being one of the stars. So as usual, I'll look at the Adren side of it first. Is it right to remove Adren? I think overall it is. He didn't really bring much to the team, quite frankly. After watching them play a bunch, he got a whole bunch of tournaments. He played 7 tournaments in total, LAN tournaments with them, not including EPL groups, and sure, one of those was with Yanko instead of Nico, so I don't judge them too harshly, but you look at the results over those 7 tournaments, so they were 5th to 6th at iBuyPower Masters, losing twice to Ghost in best of ones, sure best of ones, sure your first LAN, yeah, but that's not really that good. That's really not that acceptable. E-League CSGO Invitational, they lost to Cloud9, but then they beat everyone in the tournament. It was only a 4-team tournament with not really that great teams. So that's not bad, but FaZe should have been far and away the best team in that particular tournament anyway. In fact, it was a shock that Cloud9 lineup with Flosher and Kyo actually beat them in a best of 3. So, okay, took care of business overall. IM Katowice, the major, they made it to top 8, which is pretty good. They end up playing Na'Vi. Can't really blame them. Na'Vi's a very good team. Sure, you'd hope with the players that they have in FaZe, when they signed Adren, they were hoping this was one of the fixes. Like, this could take them potentially to major wing level. It didn't. They were stuck really at a pretty similar level to where they were before they kicked Carrigan. Then you have Blast Pro Series Sao Paulo, where they finished 5th out of 6. Not very good. That was a pretty bad one all in all. They were in really bad form at the time. They went to Star Series Season 7, and even though they didn't make top 8, they didn't make the playoffs. That's actually an underrated performance because it was all best of 3s. They came close to beating Renegades in a best of 3. They looked pretty good at times actually in that tournament. Sure, they lost to North in the end, which is pretty bad, but even so, North has been known to occasionally have an inspired performance. I thought that that was an example of a performance where 9th to 11th isn't actually that fair to how good FaZe was at that point in time. They'd much improved their Inferno Mirage, for example. Then they go to Blast Miami. This is the one where they just tore through the event. They won it outright. They beat Team Liquid in the best of 3 finals. Then they had IEM Sydney, which was the aforementioned event where Yanko had to play instead of Nico because Nico never got his visa, and so Yanko had to play as an in-game leader. So even making 9th to 12 wasn't bad there, actually. They were close to making top 8. So one of the reasons why I do think it's right to remove Adren is I didn't really see him working on any level, actually. Like, first of all, the fragging was generally underwhelming. I know he was only replacing Carrigan as a non-in-game leader player, therefore he was as good as Carrigan in that sense, but I think Carrigan's style of fragging actually even contributed more to the game. Stylistically gave a little bit more, I think, width to the FaZe side. Actually made them a little bit better, well-rounded. Adren was just an okay player in that respect. Didn't bring improved firepower. Obviously, you want a FaZe Clan to have big-time punching power, as it were. He didn't also, quite frankly, he brought some clutching. Like, he certainly won some clutches. He was all right, but he wasn't like some monster in that respect. And his whole, like, I've got the experience, I'm a veteran, I could play supportive and set you up. That didn't really work out, quite frankly. Like, I don't really think he's a player that suited to supportive play. I hoped he was. I hypothesized maybe he could be in this team because in early CSGO, he was a bit more supportive in the first Virtus.pro lineups. But to be fair, those were lineups mainly known for just going slow and people just tended to just frag out and find aim duels. So even as a supportive element, he wasn't really like a true support in the modern sense. This was very early CSGO, remember? So the meta was completely different. A lot more of the game was just about individual play or raw fragging power. There wasn't as much like tactical aspects. People were still figuring out even the mechanics of the game. So actually, despite seeing what an incredibly well-rounded player he was in Gambit, I think he probably is suited to better. Maybe he's not going to be a superstar player at the moment, but he should probably at least be one of the main fraggers in a team. Now, in terms of bringing in Neo, he doesn't really address individually many of the aspects that Adren was unable to address. In fact, he's pretty similar in many aspects because individually, he's a pretty bad or average fragger at best for the majority of the last 2 years of play. Worse than people realise, actually. People don't realise how many tournaments he had that were like 0.45 KPR. And it's like some really fucking bad tournaments. But the reason why people don't realise is no one harped on it. He didn't get as much abuse because he's CSGO royalty, because he's probably the greatest player in the history of the original Counter-Strike. And he also played for a beloved team. So even within that team, people blamed Snacks for being arrogant, or they blamed Bialy for playing PUBG, or they blamed Taz for being outspoken, or they blamed Pasha for being a streamer. But Neo seemed to always skate by for quite a long time because people wanted him to be good. I wanted him to be good, but he wasn't. And so since he wasn't, I'm going to say that he fucking wasn't. In fact, he's a pretty shit player at times individually in terms of his fragging ability. Now, with that said, he also, quite frankly, has never been very good individually in CSGO, minus like that brief period around like late summer 2015 when they won CVOP Season 7 over Na'Vi, when he was AWPing. That was pretty cool. He's had occasional time periods where in the concept of being a supportive element, he was pretty strong, like in their revival in 2016. He was winning tons of clutches. He was putting up all right fragging numbers, but then you looked at what he did in the game. He seemed to connect things up. Obviously, crucially, he's been the in-game leader for most of the time in Virtus.pro that was successful. So that's really the angle you look more to where he could bring something Adren didn't, and crucially could add something to FaZe. So one of the reasons why I bring up the fragging aspect or the individual aspect is I actually do think that FaZe, if they're going to go with anything like the old formula, they need more firepower. They actually don't have the firepower right now. I know they have similar names, but those names aren't living up to what you think of FaZe when they first put it together with Carrigan, Olaf, Guardian, that super team lineup, and how heavy they were in terms of heavy hands, power punching, big time punches chance, one of the best fragging teams in the game, could just take over completely, front run you out of the building. They aren't really that team anymore and haven't been for quite a while at this point in time. So they don't have enough fragging power as it is at the moment, in my opinion, for this type of team they're trying to be with, the other limitations they have elsewhere. So for me, it's his role that is the main reason to recruit Neo to this team. If you're bringing him in to be an in-game leader, to be a veteran player, to be a supportive element, he has done all three of those, at times to a high level, at times to an alright level, at times to a bad level in CSGO. That's basically been the CSGO story for Neo as a player. So if he can address the style and role deficits that FaZe had, now we can start to move somewhere. Because you look elsewhere at the talent FaZe Clan has, you can just become a normal team in terms of the structure, typical structure I have, like 2 stars, a middle hybrid star, supportive elements. Yeah, in this team, you're always going to skew more towards the fragging side. But bringing in a player like him, especially when someone like Olaf and Rin, they've shown a willingness to play more roles than be star players cater to, you can start to compose more of a normal team than FaZe ever had with Guardian and Olaf in the lineup. So that's the interesting, intriguing element for me, because obviously team play is the element of a team that's so hard to predict. You're going to look at the raw individual players. So if you look at Virtus.pro's best, he was the in-game leader. Interestingly enough, because obviously him, Taz, at times Snacks swapped the role around. Well, in 1.6, it was different. In 1.6, famously, a lot of their best periods was when Taz was the in-game leader, and then when they had Cuban take over as the in-game leader, it often wasn't as good, except at the very end of the game. Neo himself also took some turns in 1.6, but not very often, usually for like a month at a time or a tournament, and generally, he was doing it like half kind of like Nico, actually, just calling around himself a little bit, because he was the best player in the world. So I actually think, interestingly, this is probably the most misunderstood aspect of this move, which is that Neo as an in-game leader, if you look at what he did as an in-game leader in Virtus.pro at their prime, that style could work very well in FaZe if they are receptive to it. And presumably, if they bring a player like Neo in, who individually looks washed, that's because Nico and Yanko and Olaf and all the other players respect him and think he can bring something in this aspect, bring something they don't have. They have the fragging ability to some degree, depending on which player we're talking about, but they don't have a good tactical system that can work with their players. Clearly, they can't go on Astralis route or fucking Ents route and be really tactical. At the same time, they can't go wind the clock back and magically make Guardian and Olaf and all those players way better and be the ultimate fragging power team. In fact, at the moment, they wouldn't even be as good as a Team Liquid type squad out there. So the angle they have to go for is they have to create a new identity. If you look at what Virtus.pro used to be, a couple of really big fraggers, a couple of former stars in 1.6 turned into supportive elements in Neo and Taz, Pasha in the middle at one point in time, one of the best players in the world in 2014. In later years, still a pretty good fragger. One of the things about Virtus.pro is they always had, until the last 2 years, they always had a pretty decent fragging squad. They were always somewhat underrated in terms of like the raw firepower they had. They weren't one of the best teams in that respect, but they were always one that was pretty good, because then with their like quite interesting sort of off-kilter, I would say like divergent development of their vision of tactical play, which was never like super tactical. It was like a set of tactics, a playbook of tactics, and then a lot of like individual deviations within those that they would just seemingly do. I often thought they sometimes did them in a round. They just came up with it on the fly. It was a mixture of doing something on the fly that leads into a tactic or comes out of a tactic, and that's what makes you so tough to read, because how can someone count you when it's never going to be exactly the way they anticipate? And then that was the catalyst to make the fragging look really dominant when they ran over you with the plow. So that kind of style could work fucking amazingly in FaZe Clan. If they can get Rain and Olaf playing roles in this respect, Neo's going to be a supportive aspect. And then you've got the firepower of Nico. That already could be a style that could be really, really strong. And you could think FaZe, with their own style in the past, they'd love to have a plow style team. Now, what Guardian's going to do and how the AWP's going to fit into that is going to be something of an interesting challenge, because obviously Virtus.pro famously never had a really dominant primary AWPer. Even Pasha was more of a hybrid, and even when he was the primary AWPer of VP in the early days, he was a very aggressive player who played very close range at times. So he wasn't really the traditional Guardian-esque AWPer who holds a spot, moves around that spot, re-peeks into that spot and gets to the 4 kills when people rush around the corner on Inferno, is he? He's not that sort of AWPer. So there is some potential here. There is some wiggle room where Neo has some tools to work with, I think, actually. So for me, it's going to be how he plays as a supportive element. If he can win clutches, bring experience, that is a massive boon to this squad. They need some polish to help them close games out. And more importantly, if he can have a knock-on effect on players like Guardian, Olaf in terms of role, Rain's fragging individually very well right now, that's where FaZe Clan become a good team again. Because at the moment, underwhelming fragging, still underwhelming fragging. The one time they had really sick fragging, they just outright won Blast Miami, so you can see that they didn't have it for the other tournaments. And that's despite having not only one of the best players in the world right now in terms of fragging and impact, Nico, but one of the best players of all time in CSGO. So if your overall fragging's not that good, and you're not a great tactical team, and the team plays a bit squeaky, yeah, you've got problems as a team. Actually, the results are better than they should be, if anything. You're going against the principles that have made up Counter-Strike. Now, if you look this year, Rain is much improved in terms of fragging. He's way, way closer to what he was in 2017. Pretty strong player at the moment, probably the second best in FaZe after Nico. Guardian has been not so good the last few months. He had some alright tournaments, but generally he looks a bit off. I think you're right to speculate that maybe he retires after this year. Olaf Meister had a terrible start to the year, looked really washed, but has actually started to turn it around the last few months and starting to look promising again. So what a perfect time to actually try out Neo, because that's the key thing. They're trialing him as well. He's not the permanent signing. So at the moment, you can just see how it goes the first few tournaments. So to me, the move now is have Neo bring in something of the VP style, get that input in place, and start becoming more of a cohesive all-around team than just firepower. Like, bring in a little bit of tactical innovation. I know that's why Yanko's there. It's one of the things he wants to do, is not just have them play this old style they did. So as a team, they're still just a dark horse team. They're a team that, obviously, with an amazing player like Nico, you can win some games you shouldn't. You've got some good names otherwise. If it comes together, you can be good. I want to see how cohesive they get. Because if they become cohesive, that would be exciting as fuck. If they were in the pack with Ents and Renegades and Na'Vi, and it's like they had really good fragging power, but then a nice overall style and a little bit of tactical elements and build out the map pool a bit more than it was, that would be really awesome if they were a consistent team. Whether they're the best or whether they're the 5th best or whether they're the 8th best, I want them to be consistent so I can enjoy the style more than just watching the individuals play. For me, the in-game leading aspect is the main element, because that can be the catalyst to help other players be better and make the team's colour make more sense, be more within a certain quadrant where it makes sense. Like, there's a logic to how they play. Each person has a role that they contribute, even if that's not just contributing fragging, because it has been frag or walk in fucking FaZe Clan for the last few years. This video was kindly supported by Wendelful, Butt Pounder 420, Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, JDubs, Chi Mao, Daniel Olivar, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Alexander Rao, and a special thanks go out to Jerky's Minion, weixz, don't know how to say that, it's like a Chinese name, and Max Laine. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? It's going to be a big feature in the next few months for me. Well, my Patreon, that's a feature. Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Would you like teasers for my upcoming content? Find out who the next guests are. Maybe you want to take part in that monthly donator discussion with me. Well, if you want any of the above perks, put your money where your mouth is. Support me via the Patreon link below and join the Scrilluminati today.